me. He came at a time when people were ready to accept that message. And because of that, Prabhupada was able to pick up so many personalities and bring them to Krishna consciousness. Bring the other chair here. Oh, okay. There is a interesting statement which I was personally present when I heard. This was about 10 to 15 years ago. Prahlad Maharaj ki jai. When I was in Mayapur Dham, when Bhakti Charu Maharaj organized a huge program within his home, which he has a beautiful apartment in Sridham Mayapur. And he called all of Prabhupada's disciples for this meeting, and there was a great attendance of Prabhupada's disciples, at least, I don't know, anywhere from 80 to 100 Prabhupada disciples had come for this gathering, and it was all about hearing about Srila Prabhupada or talking about Srila Prabhupada. And one personality, a very senior Prabhupada disciple, he spoke and he said something really quite interesting. He said, I was massaging Srila Prabhupada. It was one of my services, not a regular service, but a service I did when it was needed. And usually Prabhupada, during those times, he would speak about something. But this time he was quite quiet. And I was feeling a little bit awkward because Prabhupada would always speak something Krishna conscious or something important, something relevant to spreading Krishna consciousness. And then all of a sudden, Prabhupada just started to speak, and he started to speak about himself. And he said, I was in the spiritual world with Krishna, and Krishna told me, go to the material world and preach. I said to Prabhupada, material world? Horrible place. Horrible place. That's the way it was described. And what Krishna said to me, no, you go, you write some books, and I'll protect you. So, and that was the end. That was quite powerful when I heard that. That Prabhupada actually understood that he was sent by Krishna to do this work. So when we understand the position of Srila Prabhupada, we know he's Nitya Siddha. Nitya Siddha means he's an eternally liberated soul who came to do this work of spreading Lord Chaitanya's mission around the world for the benefit of the entire human population. And of course Lord Chaitanya said, every town and village my name will be chanted. We get a little insight of the greatness of Srila Prabhupada. Of course, sometimes they say, that when a person is very humble, that humility seems to kind of cover over the greatness. Usually you think of somebody great, somebody who's really dynamic, powerful, and Prabhupada was like that. But his humility was just so natural and so, accommodating, that he could speak to anyone and everyone. And he would never be like in a different realm. He could play with little kids. He would take Malati's little daughter, and she had a little thing of Krishna. So he took it, she was there, she showed it, Prabhupada took it, and he put it behind his back and said, where's Krishna? Where's Krishna? Where's Krishna? And little Saraswati, that's what her name was, she said, where's Krishna? She started to cry. Krishna, where's Krishna? Where's Krishna? Prabhupada, here's Krishna. So Prabhupada would do that. He would even be very, sweet to little children. And he could speak to the most elevated persons in the material world who are, very prestigious. and very, what we say, respected in that way. And he could, astound them with the way he presented Krishna conscious philosophy. Prabhupada was a genius. When you listen to Srila Prabhupada's lectures, you see how he places the philosophy in such a way that it's so unique, but it's so right to the point. He doesn't beat around the bush or kind of like just guess. He's clear, spontaneous, and the way he responds to questions or presents a problem and then answers the problem, it's like you wouldn't think that's the way the answer would come. But Prabhupada would be like that. He had a way to answer that was his own style, but it was so clear and so powerful. When Prabhupada was in London, 1973, he wanted to meet important people. He said, bring important people to me, I want to discuss Krishna consciousness with them. And so Shyam Sundar was there with Prabhupada. And Shyama Sundar, if you know Shyama Sundar, he is very, what we say, innovative. He knows how to do things. And he was able to meet so many poets, authors, and people from various, what we say, religious and secular backgrounds that had positions in the material world. I can't remember all of the personalities that he met. But one time, Prabhupada, there was a society called the Mensa Society. It's in London. And Mensa Society is considered to be a very erudite, philosophical, analytic society. And they take great analytic problems and try to discuss it and come up with answers. This is their whole, program. So they came, and there was a few of them, and they came on Shyama Sundar's, invitation to meet Srila Prabhupada. So they were talking, and Prabhupada was explaining how Krishna is the all-powerful Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada explained that there's nothing outside of Krishna's power. In fact, everything is his power, and everything works under his power. He is all-powerful. Sometimes Prabhupada would give a little example, just to bewilder us. He would say, Krishna is all-powerful. He can make day into night and night into day. I'm trying to figure that one out. But in other words, there was nothing outside of Krishna's, all-powerful force that he couldn't do. So this Mensa Society, they're used to, philosophical wrangling, just going back and forth with ideas. So one of the leaders said, well, I guess he called him Swami. Well, Swami, can Krishna create a rock he can't lift? It's a trick question. Because if you say yes, then that limits his lifting power, and if you say no, that means his creative power is not there. So whatever way you answer, it's wrong. So don't try to trick Prabhupada. So Prabhupada said, yes, Krishna can create a rock he can't lift, and then he'll lift it. So that was the end of that discussion. Sometimes devotees would try to second guess Srila Prabhupada, try to figure out what he was doing or what he's going to say, or maybe even try to play tricks on Prabhupada. This is the Americans, you got to get it. If you don't know Americans and stick around, you'll find out more about us. We're kind of like an unusual group. So, there was one, what was it? There was two things I was going to say. Oh yeah, Prabhupada was in his room, and he was all alone, obviously, and no one was in there. So someone wanted to see, what's Prabhupada doing when he's alone? So there was one of these big, elaborate doors made out of wood with a nice keyhole. So the devotee looked through the keyhole, and he could see an eye looking back at him. Don't try to spy on your spiritual man. He's watching you. And another, when Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, there was one devotee. So Prabhupada would go to his, he had a place right near the temple in Vrindavan. And Prabhupada would go out his room, and he had a pair of nice white, like, moccasins or some real soft shoes. Very nice. He would put them on, and he would walk to the temple, take them off, and then go into the temple. And then when he would turn, he'd do the same thing when he got to his room. He'd leave it right in front of the door. So one devotee was thinking, I'm going to get those shoes. I want those shoes. They're special shoes. They're Prabhupada shoes. So he made a plan, and he found out the exact size, went to shopping in Vrindavan, and found the exact same pair. So now he was going to make the switch. So Prabhupada every day had that same pattern. So now he's ready. This is the time he's going to do it. And he's watching Prabhupada go into his room. And this time, instead of Prabhupada going into the room and taking his shoes off for him, he walks in the room with his shoes on. First time he ever did it, just the time when the devotee was going to do that. And the devotee was thinking, he never does that. And then the next day, Prabhupada was giving class, and he said, don't try to play tricks on your spiritual master. Yeah, you couldn't do the Prabhupada. He could see through everything, whatever. Sometimes he would look at you, and you would think, "Oh my God, what is he saying?" Prabhupada could see you for who you were, and he wouldn't judge you, but he could understand everything about you, practically everything about you, just by looking at you. And he did that with me, and I got nervous. So yeah, Prabhupada had that power, and he had that foresight. So when we listen to Prabhupada's lectures, either he talks about the present, or he talks about the past, or he talks about the future, you can understand what he's saying has value and has truth. It's not something that he is theoretically trying to assume. Prabhupada was Trikala Gyan. He knew past, present, and future. There's a few interesting stories in the life of Srila Prabhupada that are really worth. I told one this morning, but this one is a really interesting story. Shruti Kirti Prabhu, we know for many years, he was Prabhupada's personal servant. And he would do other works, such as arranging for Prabhupada's cooking, everything like that. So one time Prabhupada was in Mexico City, Mexico, and he had to take a short flight to Caracas, Venezuela. So he was leaving the place, and one lady, she had some prasadam for Prabhupada, and she wrapped it in some aluminum foil and gave it to Prabhupada. Prabhupada immediately gave it to Shruti Kirti and says, we will take it later. So when they got on the plane, and Prabhupada always liked to sit near the window. He liked the window seat. And one thing Prabhupada would always do, not always, but a lot of times, is that just before landing, usually about 20 minutes before landing, the pilot gets on and says, okay, we're making our descent now, everyone into their seats with your seatbelts. As soon as that would come on, Prabhupada would get up and go to the restroom. One time he was doing that, Shruti Kirti was telling me, and the stewardess said, excuse me, sir, you have to sit down. And Prabhupada just kept walking. And she wasn't even there. So Prabhupada, he said, I always did what I wanted to do. I always did what I wanted to do. So while they were on the plane, Prabhupada's on the window, Shruti Kirti Prabhu's in the middle, and Paramahansa Swami's traveling, so there's three of them, and he's at the aisle seat. So Prabhupada said, Prasad. And so Shruti Kirti takes out the little, aluminum foil, and he opens it up, and he puts it on Prabhupada's little desk there in front, little table. So Prabhupada starts taking a little bit. And then he takes it and passes it over to Shruti Kirti. And Shruti Kirti takes some of it and gives it to Paramahansa. So they're just about to honor it. And they're actually honoring it. And then the stewardess, she comes over, she said, "Oh, that looks nice." And she went and put it right in her mouth, right from Shruti Kirti's plate. And he's thinking, what is this? The stewardess grabs the food and she's eating it. And Prabhupada's just looking. He's not even fazed. And he turns to Shruti Kirti, ask her if she can get us some hot milk. So he did. And she came, she said, "Oh yes, I'll go to business class and I'll be back." And she came with a nice glass of hot. Prabhupada was very pleased. So that's pretty much the end of the story, I thought. Then one day I was reminding Shruti Kirti Prabhu of that story. He said, "Maharaj, I was giving a class just recently talking about Prabhupada, and I had just finished after 3 hours of speaking about Prabhupada. And I was tired. I was thinking, I want to, take some rest. So I was getting off my seat and 2 brahmacharis walk up to me and said, "Can we speak to you?" And this is the way he described it. He said, "Oh, I'm so tired." "No, this is important." "Okay." So they said, we were doing books in Mexico, and we were going door to door in the outer regions, more like in the village areas. So he came to one house and we knocked on the door and we opened it, and there was this lady, and she was, "Oh, Hare Krishna, come on in." And her whole house was decorated. She had pictures and various types of paraphernalia that we use. And was the same stewardess. She got Prabhupada's remnants. And just by doing that, she had no other contact with Krishna consciousness. Maha. That's powerful. The Shastras say there's 3 things that are extremely rare and extremely powerful substances. The water that washes the feet of the great devotees, the pure devotees, the dust from their lotus feet, and their prasadam. These 3 things. The Nectar of Devotion says that one should make an effort to get it. And sometimes the devotees would, when Prabhupada would finish his plate, they would take the plate and run in the other room and just, without distributing it to the other devotees, which they were supposed to do, they would say, "It's Maha." So it's very powerful spiritual substances. So don't miss the opportunity. In fact, seek out the opportunity to get the Maha, because it is very spiritually powerful. It's like a funny story. Prabhupada was in Hawaii, and in Prabhupada's room, the toilet didn't work. So he calls the devotees, he said, "The toilet's not working, get it fixed." So they said, "Okay." So they went out and they came back after some time. I think it was another day later. And then Prabhupada asked him, "Is the toilet working?" And they said, "Yes, Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, "Did you try it?" "It's working, Prabhupada." "No, did you try it?" And they didn't know what to say. So Prabhupada said, "Come on." So he went into the kitchen and he made some chapati dough and he rolled it into balls and he said, "Here, place this in the toilet and then flush it." And they were thinking, what is it? Oh, okay. So they did it and they came back. "It works, Prabhupada." Now you try to figure that one out. I can't. It's hard to understand that particular, mood of Prabhupada. Well, that was Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada always knew how to respond to a situation. There was one lady who joined the movement and she hated men. Men. Don't even give me that word. And then she somehow or other she came into Krishna consciousness. And then after some time, I don't know how long later, she said to Prabhupada, "I can't worship that man, Krishna." Prabhupada said, that's okay, Radharani's higher. Oh, okay. She was pretty much pacified by that. So sometimes we have, people come to our society that we're not sure how to really engage them in activities or place them properly in the ashram. So one gay man came, and so, what do you do with a gay person? He wants to join the ashram. Hare Krishna. So they wrote to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, we have this man, he's gay. So if we put him in the brahmachari ashram, it's not so good. And we can't put him in the ladies' ashram because he's not one of them. So what do we do? So Prabhupada said, well, choose one of the two, but make sure he doesn't change. Choose one of the two, but make sure he doesn't change. So I don't know what happened after that, but anyway. That was told us by Anuttama Prabhu. He told that story. So Prabhupada always knew how to deal with situations. And Prabhupada's devotion was so powerful. It was so just seeing Prabhupada, just being anywhere around him, the whole atmosphere would be spiritualized just by his presence, even if he wasn't speaking. The devotees had so much attraction. They would live simply to get an instruction from Prabhupada. If Prabhupada gives me an instruction, anything, whatever it is, then I'm happy and my life is successful. Of course, sometimes devotees felt that the instructions were a little too hard to carry out. Like Prabhupada never liked us to give up one particular service in order to do another one. When Prabhupada would sometimes say, well, we have to do this service, and then they would say to Prabhupada, oh, okay, but which area should we, slow down or cut out? Prabhupada, no cutting out, no slow. You add. You just add, that's all. He knew that, especially in the American mentality, is that, there's two aspects to it. One of them is keep them busy or else they're in trouble. Or else they'll cause trouble somehow. And so he always kept us busy. He did that with all his disciples. He understood that, we're still affected by the modes of passion and ignorance. So if we stay engaged always in devotional service, we would have a chance to, rise above these lower modes. So Prabhupada wanted us to be fully engaged in devotional service. And of course, that is our understanding of how to make advancement in devotional service. But as a principle, it was a way to keep us, in the right direction. Keep the devotees engaged 24/7. And Prabhupada said, you guys are Americans? You got to do something important. He said, your country's important and you have to do something big. So do something big for Krishna. That was Prabhupada. So he always encouraged us to do something more, something big. He sent 3 couples to London he gave them, I think it was $150 or maybe a little bit more, I'm not sure how much it was. And in those days, when you have to go into London, you had to show that you had some financial support, otherwise you couldn't get in. And so the devotees came in at 1 couple at a time. So 1 couple, they came in with their money. They showed that we have some money and we can take care of ourselves. And then once they got in, they took the money and they wired it to the other couple. And then they got in and they gave it to the 3rd couple. And that's how the 3 couples got in. And eventually that's what opened up the entire London yatra. It was really amazing how much sacrifice they made for Srila Prabhupada. They were living in basements without any regular income or even any food. They were just making friends and getting whatever they needed to somehow live. So that was what it was like in the early days of spreading Krishna consciousness. Sometimes Prabhupada would just give you a service, and he would say, open up a temple, or go here, or distribute some books. And Prabhupada pushed us into learning how to really surrender like that. He said, I am pushing you, and he told the leaders that were leading the devotees, you have to push the other devotees. But he says, push, but don't break. So he said that the art of pushing is knowing how you can push someone, but not causing them to, go away because of too much pushing. But Prabhupada did everything. There's a specific book that's just came out. It's called "I Will Build You a Temple" by Giriraj Swami. He worked on that book for 20 years or more, gathering information and very carefully composing this book. It's about 600 pages or more, and it's about the entire effort that the devotees made in order to build the Radharasa Bihari temple in Bombay. What a fight that was. And Prabhupada once said somebody should write a book about this. But when you read that book, you see how Prabhupada made the difference for the whole thing. It was only because of him intervening in the right time, and at the same time understanding how to deal with people who were trying to cheat. And it wasn't just one person, it was practically the entire municipality of Bombay that were causing devotees hardships, either trying to discourage them or just get as much money as they could from the devotees. Because they knew Prabhupada had money coming in from the Western countries. But Prabhupada somehow or other was able to fight his way through that. And to this day, a grand temple is... When you read that, you just see how intelligent Prabhupada could deal with, even in material ways. He wasn't like, just like very adept spiritually. He knew how the material energy was working, and he knew how to deal in situations. Just like when we first started to organize our society, we wanted to centralize all the temples under one umbrella. Prabhupada said, no, don't do that. Because if there's ever a lawsuit or a problem, then we lose our whole society. Prabhupada could foresee that. And of course, we know we had 2 lawsuits where they tried to destroy our society. But because Prabhupada made each temple independent entities, they had to attack each temple separately. They couldn't attack us as a society. And because of that, we have a society in the Western world, in America now still. That was Prabhupada's vision for the future. He could see legally, organizationally, so many things, how this movement should go on. He didn't just simply give us philosophical or spiritual knowledge. He was giving us practical day-to-day things on how to deal in this material world with people, with organizations, with situations. That was Prabhupada. He was everything. He was everything. And of course, he wanted to delegate a lot of that to his leaders, but a lot of times they weren't up to the standard, so Prabhupada would have to take over and then somehow deal with the situation. Giriraj Swami talks about one situation where, Prabhupada would stay up, and we heard from Kadambakana Maharaj how Prabhupada would spend, so much time doing his Bhakti-Vedanta translations late in the evening. And so one time, Prabhupada would be there, he would but sometimes Prabhupada would be thinking about how to spread Krishna consciousness. So one time he rang his bell, he'd have a bell, and usually his servant would sleep outside the door, because if Prabhupada needed anything, the ringing of the bell would wake up the servant and he would come in immediately. So this time it was Giriraj. The Giriraj came in and he's still, waking up. He pays his obeisances to Prabhupada. And he sits and he's waiting for Prabhupada to speak. And Prabhupada says, how will this movement go on when I'm gone? How will this movement go on when I'm gone? And Giriraj said, well, you know, we'll be strict. We'll have all the devotees go to Mangal Arati and chant their 16 rounds, and we'll go out on book distribution. And Prabhupada just listened. He said, this movement will go on by organization and intelligence. That's what he said. That was the answer. How to intelligently organize our movement in such a way that we get the maximum benefit from the devotees who have such great abilities, qualities, and desires to serve. But Prabhupada was thinking, we have to learn how to organize things. Because without proper organization, of course, my experience in here, in Ljubljana, in Slovenia, people are very organized. Pretty good, yay. Very, very organized. There could be a few other things that happen, it could get a little better, but just like sometimes, where's the lighter for the, for the RT? Okay, no, it's not here, okay. That's a little thing. But yeah, so Prabhupada said organization and intelligence. An example is given, just to illustrate this point, is that if someone comes to you, I'll use myself as an example. Someone comes to me and says, Maharaj, can you give me a glass of milk? And I say, you just walk down the road and you'll see the barn, and inside the barn is the cow, and you go in there, you get your bucket, and you milk the cow, and you'll have your milk. Terrible organization. But if you come and you ask, and I am all ready, and I have it all ready for you, and I just heat it up, and I say, here's your glass of milk. That's organization and intelligence. In other words, the Brahmins, they have the intelligence. The Kshatriyas, or the leaders, are supposed to be adept at organizing everything in such a way that we get the maximum amount of benefit from our efforts in Krishna consciousness. When Prabhupada said to us, and this wasn't a question, Prabhupada said to us, we could take over the world in 18 days. But you're not ready. He said, you're not ready. In other words, if we were fully surrendered and were fully able to understand how to engage according to Srila Prabhupada's direction, that's a lot of power. This movement is very, very, very powerful. Extremely powerful. Why? It's ordained by God Himself. He's empowering this movement to spread Krishna consciousness around the world. He's waiting for each and every one of us to take that mercy, that empowerment, and develop it in our own practice of Krishna consciousness and spread it around the world. This movement can spread fast, as we were hearing from Prahlad Maharaj when he was talking about how he was distributing books. He was out there and he would just pray to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, can you send me somebody to... And as soon as he prayed like that, somebody was there, and the book was out. That's Krishna. Sincere prayers make a big difference. But if we can, when we say amalgamate that mood in everything we do in Krishna consciousness, the most amazing things would happen. You hear how many books we've distributed as a society to this day. As close to 600 million books. And that's only what's recorded. There's a lot of books that were never really recorded that went out. So that's a lot. That's a lot. In other words, and Prabhupada really, really wanted his books distributed. He saw that this is the way to spread Krishna consciousness in a very, very direct and powerful way. In I think it was 1970, I think we didn't have much, I'm not sure what was available in terms of books at that time. I think Krishna book came out in 1970, and before that we had Back to Godhead magazine, and devotees were selling incense, and Back to God had magazines on the street. And two devotees, they were driving a car, it was in America, they pulled into a gas station, and they got gas. And so the man filled up their car in a tank of gas, and they looked, they had no money. And that's the way it was then. You get your gas first and then you pay. But they didn't have any money. There was no credit cards. So one of the devotees, his name was Premarnava. The other devotee, I can't remember his name. He's very, very powerful book distributor. Buddhimanta, yeah, Buddhimanta. So they had a Krishna book there, and it just recently came out. So they took the Krishna book and offered it to the gas attendant and said, "Can you take this as an exchange for the gas?" And then they started speaking a little bit about the book, and the man said, "Yeah." And he took it. And that little story got back to Prabhupada eventually, and then of course we started to understand we could distribute books in public on the street. And that sort of sparked the whole idea of book distribution. And later, it started to build and build. And I think it was in 1973 when we really started to distribute books in a very, what we say, voluminous way. And when Prabhupada was hearing that, he would say, "Oh, okay, next year you double it." And so the devotees did. They not only doubled it, but they went beyond the double. So when Prabhupada got the results for 1974, he said, "All right, next year you double it." So that's how you can hear some of the stories and how the devotees would just, go out in the morning and come back like about 12 o'clock at night, eat something, and then go to sleep, and then get up, chant their rounds, and run out the door again for a full day of book distribution. And every year, up until the time of Srila Prabhupada's departure, devotees were doubling it, and it was just more and more books were going out. Just the other day, they asked me to speak on book distribution. I was telling some stories, but Srila Prabhupada, he was one of the first book distributors ever. When he came with his Srimad Bhagavatams, he had the 3 volumes of the books that he had composed in India, the 3 volumes of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And he came with 200 sets to America, and he was thinking what to do, and he thought, bookstores. So Prabhupada was going around with his books to different bookstores and trying to get the booksellers to take his books, and hardly anybody would take it. But Prabhupada kept trying. Then he went to one place, which was it was selling clothing and books also. So he came in, the man said, "Well, these spiritual books, they don't sell." But Prabhupada said, "That's okay. You just take it, and if you sell, then you can give me something after the sale. Consignment." So the man said, "All right." So he took the book. And Prabhupada came back the next day. And he said, "Did the book sell?" He said, "I told you these books don't sell." And Prabhupada left. And then Prabhupada came back the next day. And the man was a little bit annoyed that Prabhupada was coming back every day. So he said, "I told you these books don't sell." But there was a little table inside where people could sit. So Prabhupada sat down, and he said to the man, "Can you give me a glass of water?" And the man said, "Well, you just go over there, there's a tap over there, you can get some water." But the man's wife was there. He said, No, get him a glass of water. He wants a glass of water." So, it's good to have a good wife. So the man got up, got the glass of water, gave it to Prabhupada. Prabhupada drank half the glass and left. The next day the book sold. Because he did some service for a great soul. So that was Prabhupada. One little humorous story. Prabhupada was not always so accustomed to American culture, and he did things the way he was used to in India. So they have these little supermarkets, small little markets that you could go into. So Prabhupada went shopping. This when he first came to America, and he had these baskets you wheel around, and you put your items in the basket, you pick it off the shelf, and then you come to the cashier. So Prabhupada came up, and he, put all the items in, and the lady tabulated it on the cash register, and she said, "That'll be $11.55. Prabhupada said, "I'll give you $5. She said, "Excuse me, sir, but it's $11.55. Prabhupada said, "It's not worth it. I'll give you $5. And Prabhupada wasn't going to change. So she kind of I guess she was charmed by his presence. So she took Prabhupada's $5 and put the rest of the money for the bill out of her own pocket. And later on, the devotees happened to meet her, and she told the whole story. How, she paid the rest. She said, "Oh, he was such a nice man. I couldn't say no." That was Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, so there were so many wonderful stories in the life of Srila Prabhupada that, really endears you to Srila Prabhupada, how he dealt with people, how he dealt with situations. He was like everything you want a person to be. He could be sweet, gentle, so soft, but he could be powerful like a thunderbolt. One senior devotee one time, Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan. The devotee's name was Janardana, and he was a preacher. So Prabhupada asked him about a particular verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and he didn't know the answer. Huh?
We were leaders of one of Radha Damodar's parties. So Janardana was in New Vrindavan, and he asked Prabhupada a question. He said, "Prabhupada, the Christians say that God speaks to them. So how do we know that God is speaking to them?" So Prabhupada said, "Do you know what does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita?" And Janardana said, "I don't know." And Prabhupada said, "You don't know what Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita? Tesham sadatam yuktanam bhajantam priti purvakam Didami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupiyanti te. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give them the understanding by which they can come to me." And then Janardana said, "Yeah, I knew that, Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, "If you knew it, why didn't you say it?" And Janardana, to try to defend himself, he said, "No, Prabhupada, I actually knew, I knew that." She said, "If you knew it, why didn't you say that?" And Prabhupada got on Janardana, started to talk to Janardana very strongly for the next 20 minutes. That if you knew it, why didn't you say it?
And the devotees were there, they were getting nervous because Janardana was just sinking into the floor. Prabhupada was just going at him, and the devotees were thinking, we got to do something, so they tried to divert Prabhupada's attention away by asking him something. Prabhupada just didn't even listen to them. Poor Janardana. Yeah, so that was, Srila Prabhupada could, he could be like that, he could be so angry that the whole room would shake, and then the next minute it's like nothing happened. It was like, he wasn't even the slightest showing any signs of that previous moment. He could change from back and forth, which shows that this is a great soul. He's completely in control of his emotions. He can use them, he can pull them back whenever he needs. He's never controlled by his mind or senses. He knows how to use them and pull them back and not be affected on a personal level. That was Srila Prabhupada. So just to illustrate how the greatness of Prabhupada as a personality, because it's important beyond the idea of what Prabhupada has done to spread Krishna consciousness, it's also important to know the personality of Prabhupada. Because if we don't know the personality of God, Prabhupada, we really won't understand why he does what he does. I mean, we may even remain a little bewildered by that. But Prabhupada was, studying the life of Srila Prabhupada means actually understanding Krishna consciousness. He was an example and a perfect example for everything he taught and everything he wanted to teach us on all levels of Krishna consciousness. Even how to, eat properly. He taught us everything. It was like a perfect mother, a perfect father, a perfect teacher, everything. That was and he took the time to do that. He wasn't like, there was, of course, many times he wanted his senior devotees to take on the responsibilities that he was doing, because he wanted to dedicate more and more time to his translations of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But when it was necessary, Prabhupada was there to manage, to organize, to instruct, to guide the devotees. Okay, and then the one last little story, which is a cute little story, I'll just tell this one. This happened not so long ago, maybe within the last few years. A new boy, he joined a temple in America, one of the temples there. So they immediately sent him out on book distribution, not long after he joined. And he didn't know so much about the philosophy, but they wanted to give him an experience of distributing books. So he's out there distributing books. He meets one man, and he gives the man the book, and the man's looking at the book. He's looking at it and turns it over, and he sees the picture of Prabhupada, and it says, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami. And so the man looks at the boy and says, "What does AC mean?" And the boy said, "Always cool." So that fits too. Yeah, one time Prabhupada, he met in Chicago, he had so many problems with women's liberation movement. And one lady, she came, she was a reporter, she had a miniskirt on. And she was just, firing questions. Why do you shave your head? Why do you wear those funny clothes? She was just trying to find fault with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was calmly answering his questions. At one point Prabhupada said, and yes, in Krishna consciousness, it's better to have cool head and warm legs instead of cold legs and a hot head. Whoa. What could she say to that? So, sometimes Prabhupada would, know how to make you like, So, yeah, he could be anything. I mean, sometimes Prabhupada would say, someone would say, "I'm God." Prabhupada would say, "Please accept my obeisances, now sit down." And another time when somebody would say, I'm God, Prabhupada said, "That's very nice, but we know a better God than you." His name is Krishna. He's perfect. We don't think you're so perfect. So Prabhupada knew how to, disarm people who were very challenging. And there was a lot of that, especially in Australia. They really, when Prabhupada did one public gathering, there was all these political people that was talking about the Vietnam War, and they were challenging. And Prabhupada actually stopped the whole meeting, got out of there, and got in his car. When they were going out in the car, these same people were waiting on top of a bridge, and they poured paint on Prabhupada's car. It was really like a confrontation. Prabhupada knew that if he stayed there any longer, it would turn into something violent. Well, Prabhupada had to face a lot of difficulties in his preaching. It wasn't like he was always, yeah. But he always faced it in the right way, and things always worked out for the best. That was Prabhupada. He was never defeated, because he had Krishna with him always. Thank you very much. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
What time should we go to, Ananta? Is there another program? Okay, we can't go. Namo Vishnubraya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Vacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskatyade Siddharane. When I joined the movement in 1968, the way we got initiated was mostly by mail, because probably at that time I was in Buffalo and LA was around 3,000 miles away, around 4,000 kilometers. So we had to send our beads and a letter, a recommendation, to Prabhupada and wherever he was, and then he'd chant on the beads and send us back our name. So I sent my beads to Los Angeles, but I didn't know you were supposed to send a letter of recommendation. So Prabhupada got the beads and he said, where is this boy's letter of recommendation? How can I initiate him if there's no letter? So Prabhupada had a servant at that time, and he said, well, Swamiji at that time, he said, Swamiji, I talked to him on the telephone and he seemed like a nice boy. So Prabhupada said, so you're recommending him? So the boy said, I don't really know him, but he seemed like a nice boy. So Prabhupada said, if you think he was a nice boy, then I'll give him initiation. So right before I got the... So before I got the letter back, I was, at that time, Bhakti had, quote, cartoons in it. So there was one cartoon by Govinda Dasi when it was about Prahlad and Nrsingadev. So I was reading it, and I said, oh, what a nice name, Prahlad. I wish I had that name. And just at that time, the letter came back with my beads, and in the letter, Prabhupada said, please accept my blessings, I'm happy to give you initiation, and your name is now Prahladananda. One who's as cheerful as Prahlad Maharaj in all kinds of critical tests. So, at that time, Prabhupada came, this is February 1969, and then Prabhupada came in March of 1969 to Buffalo. And when he came, I was always worried, because when I came to the temple, I was always concerned because I didn't like to bow down. It was like a real, I came from Brooklyn and you didn't bow down to anyone. So it was a real struggle bowing down. But the problem was, in our temple, the altar was, as soon as you enter into the building, as I said, it was a very small building. So as soon as you entered in, there were the deities right there facing you, and you had to bow down. So I was bowing down maybe 100 times a day, because anywhere, if you went downstairs to take, for prasad and went to the kitchen, you had to bow down. You left the building, you had to bow down. Every time you had to bow down. And also you had to give the deities, every time you saw the deities, you had to give them some offering. So we had to carry around rice with us and give them a little bit of rice every time we saw them. So I was always worried, when I see Prabhupada, will I actually remember to bow down? So Prabhupada came to the airport, and when I saw him, walking down the airport, he actually appeared to me like he was floating. So I was so struck with wonder that I forgot to bow down. And then when I finally realized I should bow down, Prabhupada had already passed by. And Brahmananda came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you have to stay here and get Prabhupada's luggage. So I was quite sensitive. I thought, well, I wanted to see Prabhupada, now you give me, now I have to get his luggage. So finally I got the luggage and when I was bringing it upstairs, I was wondering, when am I going to see Prabhupada? So I kept on asking, when can I see Prabhupada? And then they gave me darshan, and we were sitting there. And they were just talking. There was Brahmananda, Gargamuni. And Gargamuni and Brahmananda, I was visiting New York, because my parents lived in New York. So I'd go to they were at 61 2nd Avenue at that time. And I'd go there with Burjan, because he was the treasurer at the time. He had the money. So one time we went there, and they had just set up spiritual sky incense. And Brahmananda was trying to sell Burjan some incense holder with some, what was called gum arabic, which they burn on a piece of charcoal. So I looked at the incense burn and I said, Burjan, don't buy it. It looks pretty fragile. That if you buy it, I think it's going to burn. So Brahmananda, he was a big guy, he was a wrestler. So he picked me up and took me outside. He was also sweet. I remember one time I came for the Ramachandra's appearance day to New York. And I walked into the temple. They were at 61 2nd Avenue at that time. And Brahmananda ran up to me and picked me up and hugged me. And he said, did you do it? I said, what did I do? He said, did you fast? Because it was like, the biggest austerity you could possibly imagine, no fasting. And for those Ramachandra appearance days, we fast until moonrise. So they had one person stationed on the roof of the building waiting for the moon to rise. I mean, prasadam was quite special back then. And then they served out prasadam, and it was all green. They dyed everything green, and the dal was green, the chapatis were green, the rice was green, the sabjis were green. Everything was dyed green. And then they served out prasadam, and there was a plate of prasadam. It was like, I thought it was little Govardhan Hill or something. And that was first. Because Prabhupada's motto was that, when you first join, you eat so much prasadam that you have to waddle like a duck. And actually the devotees were waddling like hippopotamuses. I couldn't believe how much they could actually eat. Because I was eating a little bit also. Confessions of prasadam addict. So Brahmananda took me outside and said, Prabhupada trained us up. So I said, oh, really? And then Burjan, somehow or another he bought it. We brought it back to Buffalo. We put the incense holder there. We put the charcoal on it. We put the gum arabic on it. We burned the gum arabic, and the charcoal started on fire. And the first time it burnt the incense burner. The whole thing burnt down. Yeah, of course, I'm always right. Especially when it's obvious like that. No, I'm always right, of course. So I was sitting there with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was talking to Gargamuni and Brahmananda. He's like, I was the treasurer. And he comes to me one day, and he says, we need $100 a day for prasadam. I said, what? $100 was like, maybe $1,000 now. So, and he said, Prabhupada said we need $100, for, and that was like our month's, our income or something. So I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, the first thing Prabhupada does, Devananda was Prabhupada's assistant at that time, and he brings in the plate for arti, and Prabhupada looks at it and says, "It's dirty, go clean it." So then I learned you're supposed to clean the arti plate. And then we're sitting there, and then Birabhadra, who was 8 years old at the time, he was the son of Shalavati, he was telling Prabhupada about their exploits at Spiritual Sky, and how sometimes someone would give him $20, he said, "I'll give you change." And then he'd go in the back and never appear again. And then, I thought, my God, I was one of these people from New York, that if you went to a candy store and they gave you extra change, you give it back to them. Candy stores where they used to sell sweets and things like that. So Prabhupada looked at me, he saw I was shocked, because I never even conceived it, except for my mother. I used to take, the extra change I used to take, and I used to buy stamps with them. That was the worst thing I ever did. My mother knew it, she used to laugh about it. But Prabhupada looked at me, I was so shocked. And then he looked at me and smiled and he said, "Business means cheat." Then I got trained up, as I said before, I got trained up later on in business, book selling business. So during that week, I got a chance to be with Prabhupada. Sometimes, because I was a student, so half a day I went to the university, but I got a chance to sit there, and Prabhupada, there weren't very many devotees in the temple. We had like 5 devotees in the whole temple at most. And so Prabhupada would talk to me sometimes, and another devotee, for hours at a time. And one time I was getting a little restless. And I thought, because I was practicing to be a mystic yogi before I joined the movement. So part of my business was to read auras. So I was sitting there trying to read Prabhupada's aura. And he looked at me and he said, "We are not mystic yogis, we are devotees." That was the last time I tried. And Prabhupada had a guest later on, his name was Dr. Lal. And Dr. Lal, he was an Indian gentleman, he had invited Rupanuga to come to Buffalo and to open the center there. But he was an impersonalist. So Prabhupada was talking to him, and he said that the Vedas are like your mother, and they tell you who your father is, Krishna. Just like if you want to find out who your father is, you have to ask your mother. But Dr. Lau couldn't understand what Prabhupada was talking about. So then Prabhupada said, just like if you want to find out who your father is, you have to ask your mother. So the Vedas are like our mother, and they tell us Krishna is our father. And Dr. Lau still couldn't understand. So I was thinking, wow, Prabhupada, maybe you should try something. I was thinking, maybe you should try another tactic. And finally Prabhupada said, the Vedas are like if you want to find out who your father is, you have to ask your mother. So the Vedas are our mother, and they tell us Krishna's our father. And Dr. Lau still couldn't understand. So Prabhupada rang the bell, Purushottam came, and he said, please get prasadam. That was the end of the conversation. So I learned, keep it simple. If you can't understand A, don't try to go to B. It's like Professor Kotovsky probably was talking to him for a long time in Moscow. First he started out, how we're not this body. And Professor Kotovsky could not understand anything that Prabhupada talked about. And then Prabhupada got into Varnashram, that we should have first-class men in society. And that was the last thing Professor Kotovsky wanted to hear, because he didn't believe in first-class men. And he couldn't understand that either. So Prabhupada asked Professor Kotovsky, could you please give me a taxi? And Professor Kotovsky said, sorry, Swamiji, I can't do that either. So Prabhupada had to go out in the street with Sharmasundar and find a taxi in Moscow. So keep it simple. And then they brought in prasadam, And then Dr. Lal said, Swamiji, I wrote an article for Back to Godhead, and it hasn't been published. I was thinking, well, I could figure out why. You need to figure. And Prabhupada rang the bell, Purushottam comes, this man has written an article for Back to Godhead. Please see that it's published. Because it was never published. Later on that week, there was one devotee who had joined, and we were having a program at Buffalo State University, which is a teacher's college. And this devotee was a little unusual. His name was Kushakrata. Actually, he got initiated as Kushakrata later on. Because he used to come to our temple, and he was catatonic. He'd stand at the entrance to our temple for hours and just drool. He wouldn't do anything. He'd just stand there and drool. And we couldn't figure out what to do with him. So the Prabhupada was giving the lecture, and Kushakrata, before I forget his first name, he was on the ground. Peter started to crawl on the ground.